had poisoned the very heart of Willowbrook Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late October rain pounded against the windshield of Sarah's aging SUV as she navigated the winding country road leading to Riverstone Farm. Her children, Emma, age 10, and Caleb, age 7, had finally fallen asleep in the back seat after hours of restless travel. The headlights illuminated the deteriorating wooden sign at the property entrance, nearly consumed by overgrown vines and years of neglect. "Some inheritance," Sarah muttered to herself, pulling up to the two-story farmhouse that looked like it belonged in a Gothic horror film rather than a real estate listing. It had been 8 months since her husband David's sudden death in a construction accident. 8 months of struggling to keep their small-town bakery afloat while raising 2 grieving children alone. The call about her estranged Uncle Henry's death and the unexpected inheritance had come just as their savings were dwindling dangerously low. "Your Uncle Henry has left you Riverstone Farm," the attorney had explained over the phone. "It needs to be cleared out before it can be sold. Nothing complicated, a weekend job at most." Sarah had only vague memories of visiting the farm as a child. Her mother had severed ties with her brother Henry when Sarah was only 8, and all questions about him were met with tight-lipped silence and a sharp change of subject. All she knew was that there had been some kind of falling out, serious enough that her mother had forbidden any contact. Now, at 34, widowed and desperate for financial stability, Sarah found herself the reluctant owner of a property she barely remembered, tasked with dismantling the life of an uncle who had been reduced to a family ghost. As she stepped out of the SUV, the cold rain immediately soaked through her jacket. She hurried to wake the children, helping them navigate puddles on their way to the porch. The ancient wooden steps creaked ominously beneath their feet as Sarah fumbled with the old brass key the attorney had provided. "Is this where the scary uncle lived?" Caleb asked, clutching his dinosaur backpack against his chest like a shield. "He wasn't scary, honey, just different," Sarah replied, though she had no idea if that was true. "And yes, this is his house. We're going to stay here for the weekend while we sort through his things." The lock finally surrendered with a reluctant groan, and the door swung, open to reveal darkness and the musty smell of abandonment. Sarah fumbled for a light switch, surprised when the yellowed ceiling fixture actually flickered to life. "The power's still on," she remarked, genuinely shocked. "The estate has maintained basic utilities," the attorney had explained. "Your uncle was quite methodical about such matters." The farmhouse interior was like stepping into a time capsule. Heavy oak furniture from another era filled the living room. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with volumes on agriculture, environmental science, and local history. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise, the house seemed frozen. In time, as if Uncle Henry had simply stepped out momentarily rather than passed away after years in assisted living. "Can we explore?" Emma asked, her initial wariness giving way to curiosity. "Not tonight, sweetheart. It's late, and we're all tired. Let's get our bags in and set up the sleeping bags in the cleanest room we can find." After bringing in their luggage and finding clean linens in an upstairs closet, Sarah settled the children in a guest bedroom that seemed less dusty than the others. She deliberately avoided what appeared to be her uncle's bedroom, unwilling to confront such personal spaces yet. With the children finally asleep, exhausted from the journey, Sarah returned downstairs. The rain continued its relentless assault on the roof and windows, creating an eerie soundtrack as she wandered through the main floor, trying to assess the magnitude of the task ahead. "This is going to take more than a weekend," she sighed, running her finger through the dust on a sideboard. In the corner of the living room stood a massive oak desk, its surface covered with papers, ledgers, and file folders. Sarah approached it hesitantly, feeling like an intruder, despite being the legal owner of everything in the house. This was where she would have to start, sorting through paperwork to determine what needed to be kept for legal or tax purposes, and what could be discarded. As she began organizing the scattered documents, Sarah found mostly what she expected: utility bills, property tax statements, farm equipment maintenance records. But among the mundane paperwork, she discovered a leather-bound journal wedged beneath a stack of agricultural magazines. The binding was worn, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, Sarah recognized the handwriting as similar to that on the birthday cards Uncle Henry had sent her before her mother had cut off contact. The journal entries dated back nearly 30 years, chronicling the farm's operations, but occasionally veering into more personal territory. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah flipped forward, curious about entries around the time her mother had severed ties with her brother. She found a gap of several months with no entries, and then a single page with a disturbing entry. "They're watching the farm. They've discovered I haven't destroyed the evidence." Evidence? Of what? Sarah flipped through more pages, finding increasingly paranoid-sounding entries about them monitoring the property, tapping the phone lines, intercepting mail. "Just like Mom said," Sarah whispered. "He really did become paranoid." This seemed to confirm what little her mother had shared, that Uncle Henry had developed troubling delusions after years of isolation. A wave of sadness washed over her. Had mental illness been the wedge that drove her mother to cut ties with her only brother? As she closed the journal, her elbow knocked a small framed photograph from the desk. Bending to retrieve it, Sarah noticed something odd about the floorboard, where the frame had landed. One board seemed slightly different from the others, the grain pattern inconsistent, the edges more precisely cut. Heart suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't articulate, Sarah pressed her fingers against the board and felt a slight give. She applied more pressure to one end, and to her astonishment it pivoted upward, revealing a small hollow space beneath the floor. Inside was a brass key unlike any modern one she'd seen, large, with an intricate pattern on its bow and a complex bit at the end, the kind of key that would open something old and significant. Sarah held it up to the dim light, running her thumb over the ornate engravings, a series of symbols she couldn't identify. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. Lightning briefly illuminated the room, casting strange shadows against the walls. In that flash, Sarah thought she saw movement at the window, a silhouette that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Just the branches, she told herself, though the nearest tree was at least 20 feet from the house. She returned her attention to the key, wondering what lock it might fit. The farmhouse had standard door locks, nothing that would require such an elaborate key, perhaps the barn or some old chest or cabinet she hadn't yet discovered. Sarah slipped the key into her pocket and continued searching the desk. In a drawer beneath stacks of old correspondence, she found a small, leather-bound book, different from the journal, more like a ledger. Inside were columns of numbers and initials, dates stretching back decades. Some entries were circled in red, others crossed out entirely. At the back of the ledger was a hand-drawn map of the farm property, with several areas marked with the same symbols that appeared on the key. One location was circled repeatedly, a spot behind the barn labelled only with the letters NH beside. It, her uncle had written, "Truth lies buried, but never dies." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the drafty old farmhouse. Whatever her uncle had been involved in, these weren't the ramblings of a paranoid old man. The meticulous records, the hidden key, the coded map, these were the actions of someone deliberately concealing something of great importance. "What were you hiding, Uncle Henry?" she whispered to the empty room. Sarah was pulled from her thoughts by a sound from upstairs, Emma calling out in her sleep, a habit she'd developed since her father's death. Setting the ledger aside, Sarah went to comfort her daughter, tucking the mysterious key safely in her pocket. The other discoveries would have to wait until morning. Dawn arrived with weak sunlight filtering through dusty windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sodden landscape and a sky washed clean. Sarah had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with hidden rooms and shadowy figures. After preparing a simple breakfast from the supplies they'd brought, Sarah took the children outside to explore the property, while the ground dried in the morning sun. The farm spread out before them, once productive fields now reclaimed by wild grasses, a weathered barn listing slightly to one side, outbuildings in various states of disrepair, and beyond it all, dense woods marking the property's boundaries. "Was Uncle Henry a farmer?" Emma asked, kicking at a clump of soggy grass. "I think so once," Sarah replied, "but he must have stopped farming a long time ago." "Why did we never visit him?" Emma persisted, with the direct curiosity of a child. Sarah hesitated. Mum and Uncle Henry had a disagreement many years ago, grown-up stuff. "Was it about the secret?" Caleb asked, poking at a puddle with a stick. Sarah turned to him, startled. "What secret, honey?" "The one in the house. I heard you last night talking about a secret key." Sarah sometimes forgot how attuned children could be to the adult world around them, catching fragments of information like little receivers. "I found an old key, that's all," she explained. "I don't know what it opens yet." "Can we help you find out?" Emma asked, suddenly animated. "Like detectives." Sarah smiled, grateful for anything that might distract the children from their grief, even temporarily. "Sure, but first, let's check out that old barn." The barn's heavy sliding door protested with a groan of rusted metal as Sarah pulled it open. Inside, shafts of sunlight cut through gaps in the roof, illuminating dancing dust motes. Farm equipment sat abandoned, an old tractor, various implements whose purposes Sarah couldn't identify, tools hanging from pegs on the wall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, while the children cautiously explored the safer areas of the barn. Sarah consulted the map from the ledger, orienting herself according to the markings. The spot labeled NH should be located at the rear of the barn, near the northwest corner. Sarah made her way carefully through the cluttered space, mindful of rusty nails and rotting floorboards. The back wall of the barn was lined with storage stalls, most empty save for mouldering hay and forgotten equipment. The northwest corner, however, contained something different, a large feed bin built into the wall. It seemed ordinary enough, but according to the map, this was the spot. Sarah examined the bin carefully. It was about chest high, constructed of solid wood with a hinged lid. When she lifted the lid, she found it empty, except for a few ancient corn kernels, nothing unusual or noteworthy. "What am I missing?" she muttered, checking the map again. She ran her hands along the interior of the bin, feeling for anything unusual. At the back, her fingers detected a slight gap in the wooden slats. Pressing harder, she felt one section give slightly. Heart quickening, Sarah applied firm pressure and a section of the bin's back wall swung inward like a door. Beyond was darkness. "Mom, what is it?" Emma called, noticing her mother's discovery. "Stay back, both of you," Sarah warned, retrieving her phone to use as a flashlight. She shined the light into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow passage leading beneath the barn, stone steps descending into the earth, disappearing into shadow. Common sense told Sarah to retreat, to call someone, the attorney, the local authorities, anyone, before venturing into an unknown underground space on a dilapidated property. But curiosity pulled stronger. This hidden passage might hold answers about her uncle, about the family rift that had shaped her childhood. "Emma, take Caleb back to the house," Sarah instructed. "I'm going to check this out." "But Mom—" "No arguments. I won't be long." Once the children were safely on their way back to the farmhouse, Sarah took a deep breath and ducked through the opening, beginning the descent down the stone steps. She tested each one carefully before putting her full weight on it. The air grew cooler and damper as she went, carrying the earthy scent of soil and something else, paper and leather, like an old library. At the bottom of the steps, the passage opened into a small underground room with a packed earth floor and walls of fitted stone. It wasn't a root cellar as she'd first thought. This space had been purposefully constructed and carefully maintained. Battery-powered lanterns hung from hooks on the wall, and when Sarah tried one, it surprisingly flickered to life, casting the room in a warm glow. What she saw made her breath catch. The room was an archive. Metal shelving units lined the walls, filled with document boxes, leather-bound volumes, and hanging files. A sturdy wooden table stood in the center, its surface clean and organized, with a magnifying glass, white cotton gloves, and archival tools. In one corner stood an old filing cabinet with a strange lock, ornate and old-fashioned. "The key," Sarah whispered, reaching into her pocket. The brass key fit perfectly into the cabinet's lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and the top drawer slid open smoothly, as if recently oiled and maintained. Inside were folders organized by date, stretching back nearly 60 years. Selecting one at random, Sarah carefully opened it to find newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs, all related to Willowbrook Valley's oldest and most prestigious company, North Haven Industries. The name struck a chord in Sarah's memory. North Haven Industries was the region's largest employer, manufacturing agricultural chemicals and fertilizers. Their sprawling facility on the outskirts of town was a point of local pride, providing jobs and economic stability for generations. What connection could her uncle possibly have had to them? As she examined more folders, a disturbing pattern emerged. The documents detailed meticulous research into North Haven's business dealings, focusing specifically on their waste disposal practices throughout the 1980s and 90s. Her uncle had created detailed timelines showing how the company had systematically dumped chemical byproducts in remote areas of the county, particularly near water sources that fed local farms. This alone wasn't necessarily shocking. Corporate pollution was hardly uncommon, but one folder labeled Jenkins Property contained something more troubling, photographic evidence of what appeared to be industrial waste being dumped in the dead of night, followed by newspaper clippings about a tragic accident that claimed the lives of Robert and Linda Jenkins in 1995, just weeks after they had reportedly filed a complaint against North Haven for contaminating their well water. There were other incidents too. Farmers who spoke out against North Haven suddenly suffering mysterious crop failures, livestock deaths, or personal accidents. In each case, North Haven expanded their influence, often acquiring the affected properties at a fraction of their value. "This is what got you in trouble, isn't it?" Sarah murmured, imagining her uncle compiling this damning evidence over decades. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet contained the most disturbing materials of all, a thick folder labeled Poisoned Children. Inside were medical reports from the county hospital showing alarming rates of rare childhood cancers and birth. Defects in neighborhoods downstream from North Haven's facilities. An attached report in her uncle's handwriting detailed how the company had knowingly used an experimental chemical compound in their manufacturing process, one that had subsequently been banned for its devastating health impacts. rather than properly disposing of their remaining supply or implementing safer alternatives. According to her uncle's notes, Northaven had continued using the compound, secretly dumping the toxic waste in remote areas where it eventually seeped into the groundwater. The final page of the report hit Sarah like a physical blow. Ellen's illness almost certainly connected to water contamination from Northaven runoff. Medical reports confirm same rare cancer type as Williams and Parker children, all families using well water within 2 miles of dumping sites. Ellen, Sarah's mother. Her hands trembling, Sarah set down the documents and took a shaky breath. Her uncle hadn't been paranoid after all. He'd been documenting decades of corporate crime, environmental destruction, and possibly even murder perpetrated by the most powerful company in the county. And her mother hadn't died of a rare genetic cancer, as Sarah had always been told. She had been poisoned, just one of many victims of Northaven's callous disregard for human life in pursuit of profit. A sudden noise from above made Sarah freeze, the unmistakable sound of the barn door sliding open. Footsteps moved across the wooden floor, deliberate and searching. Someone else was in the barn, and from the purposeful movement they weren't, just exploring. Sarah quickly switched off the lantern, plunging the hidden room into darkness, save for the faint glow of her phone. She gathered the most damning documents, shoving them into her jacket pockets, and listened intently to the movements. Above, the footsteps paused directly over the hidden entrance. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away. "I know you're down there, Mrs. Mitchell," called a man's voice, smooth and controlled. "I think it's time we discuss your uncle's unfortunate hobby of collecting falsehoods about respected members of this community." Northaven. It had to be. But how had they known about the hidden room? How had they known she was here? The answer hit her with chilling clarity. They'd been watching the property, probably for years, waiting for someone to discover Henry Mitchell's archive of evidence. "The documents are quite safe with us," the voice continued, "and we're prepared to be exceptionally generous in ensuring they remain private. Your uncle refused such an arrangement, which made things unnecessarily complicated for everyone." Sarah's mind raced through options. There appeared to be no other exit from the underground room. The man above knew she was here. If he represented Northaven, he had resources, influence, and based on what she'd just learned, a willingness to eliminate problems permanently. But she had something her uncle hadn't. A quick scan of the room revealed modern equipment tucked discreetly in one corner. A scanner, a laptop, external hard drives. Her uncle had collected physical evidence, but he'd also created digital backups. On the table was a small card with a password and a cloud storage address. Whatever was in these files, it wasn't just buried in this hidden room. It was already uploaded and secured elsewhere. With this knowledge came courage. Sarah reached for a second drawer in the filing cabinet, one she hadn't yet explored, and found exactly what she needed to ensure her own safety: leverage. "Mr. Northaven," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt, "I think you should know that everything my uncle documented is already backed up. If anything happens to me or my children, it all goes public immediately." The silence that followed was profound. Then the voice, noticeably less composed, "Come upstairs so we can discuss this civilly." "Like you discuss things with my mother, with the Jenkins, with all the children who died of cancer," Sarah countered, buying time as she searched for anything else useful in the hidden archive. Her hand closed around something cold and metallic beneath a stack of papers. Her uncle's old service revolver, loaded and maintained. Sarah wasn't comfortable with guns, but the weight of it provided a strange reassurance. "Those were unfortunate coincidences," the voice replied, an edge of tension now evident. "Ancient history that no one would believe without proof." "I have proof," Sarah said, moving toward the stone steps with the revolver concealed in her jacket pocket. "More than my uncle ever showed you." She was bluffing, partially, but something in the silence that followed told her the bluff was working. Whoever was up there, Northaven or someone working for the company, was recalculating their approach. Sarah Mitchell had come to Riverstone Farm to clear out an old house and close a chapter of family history. Instead, she had stumbled into a decades-long conspiracy of corruption, environmental crime, and violence, one that had claimed her mother's life and forced her uncle into isolation. Now, as she prepared to confront the man above, she realized that her inheritance wasn't just a run-down farm, it was her uncle's legacy, a meticulously documented case against one of the most powerful companies in the state, and the responsibility to finally bring them to justice. "I'm coming up," she called, gripping the revolver tightly, "and I think you'll want to hear my terms." The hidden room had changed everything. The question now was whether Sarah would live long enough to use what she'd found, and whether she could protect her children from the same forces that had destroyed so many families before hers. As she ascended the stone steps, Sarah thought of her children waiting at the farmhouse, of her mother, who had died too young, of her uncle, who had spent decades fighting a lonely battle against impossible odds. For their sakes, she couldn't afford to fail. With each step, Sarah felt something awakening within her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a determination that transcended fear. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protecting the future, her children's future, and the future of every family in Willowbrook Valley who remained unaware of the poison in their soil, their water, their very lives. The hidden room beneath Riverstone Farm had revealed more than just corporate crimes. It had revealed Sarah's purpose, a calling that would transform not only her life, but the destiny of an entire community that had lived too long under the shadow of corruption and deceit. Sarah ascended the stone steps slowly, the revolver a reassuring weight in her pocket, the documents she'd hastily gathered crinkled against her chest tucked securely inside her jacket. Each step brought her closer to a confrontation she never could have anticipated when she'd arrived at Riverstone Farm just hours earlier. As she neared the top of the stairs, Sarah paused, taking a steadying breath. She wasn't a confrontational person by nature. Her life as a small-town baker had involved warm ovens and friendly customers, not standoffs with corporate villains. Yet something in her had shifted upon discovering the truth about her family's past, a sense of purpose and righteous anger she'd never experienced before. "I'm waiting, Mrs. Mitchell," called the voice from above, impatience evident. With a final deep breath, Sarah pushed through the hidden door in the feed bin and emerged into the barn. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the weathered roof, momentarily blinding her after the darkness below. As her vision adjusted, she saw a man standing several yards away. He wasn't what she'd expected. Rather than some imposing figure, he was of average height and build, perhaps in his early 50s, dressed in an expensive but casual outfit that seemed at odds with the dilapidated barn. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his clean-shaven face tanned and lined from outdoor activities rather than labor. He stood with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Victor Northaven," he said, with a slight nod, confirming her suspicions. "I would say it's a pleasure to meet Henry Mitchell's niece, but under the circumstances." "You've been watching the farm," Sarah stated, maintaining distance between them. "Waiting for someone to find my uncle's records." Northaven's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your uncle was a troublemaker with a penchant for conspiracy theories. We've kept an eye on this property out of concern that his delusions might cause problems for innocent parties." "Innocent?" Sarah couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. "I've seen the evidence. The Jenkins fire, the contaminated water, my mother's death." Something darkened in Northaven's expression. Tragic accidents and unfortunate illnesses happen in rural communities, Mrs. Mitchell. Trying to connect unrelated events into some grand conspiracy is what unstable minds do. Is that why my mother took me away? Because my uncle was unstable? Northaven spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. Your mother recognized that Henry was becoming dangerous. With his obsessions, she made the right choice to protect you. The casual dismissal ignited something in Sarah. She was protecting me from you. She knew what you'd done to her, but she couldn't prove it, so she ran. A colorful interpretation, Northaven replied coolly. But we're not here to debate ancient history. I'm here to make you an offer. Like the offer you made my uncle. Sarah's hand moved closer to her pocket. The one he refused before he was conveniently diagnosed with dementia and placed in assisted living. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Northaven's face. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know more than you think, Sarah bluffed, drawing confidence from his reaction. The archive isn't just paper records. Everything's been digitized, backed up to multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me or my children, it all goes public. Northaven studied her for a long moment, reassessing. What do you want? Money? The farm is worthless, the soil's depleted, the building's falling apart. But I could offer you a fair price, more than fair. I want justice, Sarah said. For my mother, for all the families your chemicals poisoned, for the Jenkins family who died in that accidental fire. A cold laugh escaped Northaven. Justice? After 30 years? With evidence collected by a man everyone in town considered mentally unstable. He shook his head. Be realistic, Mrs. Mitchell. Even if you could convince anyone to look into these ancient allegations, Northaven Industries has relationships with every judge and official in 3 counties. The State Environmental Protection Agency might be interested, Sarah countered, especially with soil and water samples showing contaminants that are still present. My uncle kept testing regularly. The evidence isn't just historical. This information clearly caught Northaven off guard. His carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing a flash of genuine concern. The property values alone, Sarah continued, gaining confidence. Imagine what would happen if every landowner in Willowbrook Valley learned their soil and water had been deliberately contaminated. The lawsuits would be endless. Northaven's expression hardened. You're making a very serious mistake, Mrs. Mitchell. Your uncle made the same one. It didn't end well for him. The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah's hand closed around the revolver in her pocket, though she had no real intention of using it. She wasn't a killer, unlike the man standing before her. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. I'm going to leave this farm with copies of everything my uncle documented. You're not going to follow me or interfere in any way. And then what? Northaven asked, his tone mocking. You'll single-handedly take down a company that's been the backbone of this community for generations based on the ramblings of a bitter old man? No, came a new voice from the barn entrance. She won't be doing it alone. Both Sarah and Northaven turned toward the unexpected interruption. A woman in her early 30s stood framed in the doorway, a press badge hanging from her neck, a camera in her hands. Behind her was an older man Sarah didn't recognize. Rachel. Torres, Willowbrook Gazette. The woman introduced herself, stepping inside. I've been investigating Northaven Industries' environmental practices for 3 years now. Your uncle reached out to me before his health declined, Mrs. Mitchell. This is private property, Northaven snapped. You're trespassing. Actually, the older man said, Mrs. Mitchell owns this property now. We're here at her invitation. He turned to Sarah. Michael Donovan. I was your uncle's attorney before Northaven pressured my firm to drop him as a client. I've been waiting a long time for those records to see the light of day." Sarah stared at the unexpected allies in confusion. "My uncle's attorney? But the lawyer who contacted me was William Porter." "Yes," Michael finished for her. "North Haven. Industries made sure one of their associates handled Henry's affairs after they engineered his removal to assisted living. But your uncle was smarter than they gave him credit for. He made arrangements for Rachel to continue his work, and for me to contact you if you ever came looking for answers." North Haven's face had gone rigid with anger. "This is absurd. You have nothing but the paranoid delusions of a senile old man." "Actually," Rachel said, holding up her camera, "I have quite a bit more than that, including this entire conversation, Mr. North Haven. Would you like to clarify your comments about taking care of Mrs. Mitchell's uncle, or perhaps your references to judges and officials being in your family's pocket?" The color drained from North Haven's face. For the first time, he seemed genuinely rattled. "You're manipulating my words. This is entrapment." "It's journalism," Rachel replied, "and it's just the beginning. Thanks to Henry Mitchell's meticulous record-keeping, we now have enough evidence to justify a full investigation by authorities, beyond your sphere of influence." Michael approached Sarah, his expression gentle but urgent. "We should continue this discussion elsewhere. Mr. North Haven rarely travels without his security detail. They'll be wondering why he's taking so long." As if on cue, the sound of an approaching vehicle reached them. Tires on gravel, the distinctive purr of an expensive engine. North Haven's confidence seemed to return slightly. "My son," he explained with a thin smile. "He'd be interested to meet Henry Mitchell's niece. He handles our more delicate family matters these days." Sarah sensed the escalating danger. "We need to leave, now." "The hidden room," Rachel said quickly. "Is there another exit?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I only found it today." "There is," Michael confirmed. "Your uncle showed me once, years ago. It leads to the old storm cellar behind the house. We can circle around to our car." North Haven moved to block their path to the feed bin entrance. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave with those records. Family reputation and all that." Sarah's hand tightened on the revolver, though she still hoped to avoid using it. Rachel, seeing her tension, stepped forward. "Mr. North Haven, I've already transmitted preliminary information to colleagues at 3 different news outlets and the State Attorney General's office," she said calmly. "Preventing us from leaving will only accelerate the investigation. Your best option now is damage control." The car outside had stopped, doors slammed, followed by footsteps approaching the barn. North Haven appeared to make a rapid calculation. With a tight smile, he stepped aside. "We'll be speaking again very soon, Mrs. Mitchell. Family matters tend to require personal attention." "Documents show it was never just business," Sarah said, quietly. "You poisoned people. You destroyed lives. My mother died because of your company's chemicals." Something almost like regret flickered across North Haven's features. "The past is complicated, Mrs. Mitchell. There were considerations you couldn't understand." "Father," a younger voice called from outside, "is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine, Daniel," North Haven responded, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. "Just having a chat with Henry Mitchell's niece about her inheritance." Michael tugged urgently at Sarah's arm. "Now, while we have the chance." The 3 of them moved quickly to the feed bin. Sarah slipped through first, followed by Rachel, with Michael bringing up the rear, just as a younger man, presumably Daniel North Haven, entered the barn. "What's going on?" they heard him demand, as Michael pulled the hidden door closed behind them. In the darkness of the underground room, Michael led them to the far corner, where a narrow passage Sarah hadn't noticed earlier stretched into darkness. "This way," the older man whispered, "and hurry. They know about this place now. It won't be safe for long." As they navigated the claustrophobic tunnel, Rachel explained in hushed tones how Henry Mitchell had contacted her 4 years earlier, sharing some of his evidence against North Haven Industries. The investigation had been proceeding slowly, hampered by the company's influence, until Henry's sudden decline and placement in assisted living. "Your uncle wasn't senile," Rachel assured Sarah. "North Haven arranged for his diagnosis after he threatened to go public. By the time I realized what had happened, he was heavily medicated and under constant supervision in a facility their family practically owns. He knew they might come after him," Michael added. "That's why he created the digital backups, why he reinforced this tunnel. He was preparing for a confrontation that finally came." The tunnel eventually opened into a storm cellar behind the farmhouse, just as Michael had promised. They emerged cautiously, checking for signs of Daniel Northaven or anyone else watching the property. "My car's down the road," Michael said. "We parked away from the house in case Northaven was monitoring." "It!" Sarah froze. "My children, they're in the house." "We need to get them immediately," Rachel agreed. They hurried to the farmhouse, finding Emma and Caleb in the kitchen, thankfully unharmed. The children were confused and frightened by the sudden urgency, but Sarah managed to gather their things quickly, explaining only that they needed to leave right away. As they rushed toward Michael's car, hidden behind a stand of trees, Sarah looked back at Riverstone Farm, the place that had featured in her childhood memories, that had claimed her mother's life, that had driven her uncle to years of solitary investigation, and that had finally brought everything full circle with her return. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached Michael's car. Rachel carefully stored her camera in a secure case. "Now we take your uncle's evidence to people who can use it. State-level environmental agencies, federal prosecutors, news outlets beyond North Haven's influence." "It won't be easy," Michael cautioned, starting the engine. "North Haven won't go down without a fight. They have resources, connections, and they've already shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect themselves." Sarah clutched the documents she'd taken from the archive, thinking of her mother, of her uncle spending decades building a case in secret. "They've gotten away with it for 30 years, she said, determination hardening her voice. "That ends now." As Michael's car pulled away from Riverstone Farm, Sarah Mitchell understood that the inheritance that had seemed like a burden just hours ago was actually a sacred trust. Her uncle had left her more than a dilapidated farm. He had left her the truth, and with it the responsibility to finally bring justice to those who had thought themselves above it. Behind them, Victor Northaven watched the departing car from the barn doorway, his son Daniel beside him. "They have everything, don't they?" Daniel asked, tension evident in his voice. Victor's expression remained impassive. "They have what?" Henry Mitchell collected, "but they don't know the full story, not yet. What do we do?" The elder Northaven turned to his son, his face hardening. "What this family has always done. Whatever is necessary to protect what's ours." The confrontation at Riverstone Farm was over. The true battle was just beginning. Michael drove with the steady confidence of someone who knew every back road in the county. They avoided the main highways, taking winding rural routes that meandered through farmland and forest. No one spoke for the first 20 minutes, the tension of their narrow escape still hanging in the air. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "We should be safe for now. I doubt even the Northavens would attempt anything in broad daylight." "Tati, don't underestimate them," Michael replied, checking the rearview mirror for the third time in as many minutes. "I've watched that family operate for 40 years. They didn't build their empire by playing fair." Sarah sat in the back seat with her children, her mind racing to process everything that had happened. Just yesterday, she had been a widow, struggling to keep her bakery afloat while raising 2 grieving children. Now, she was fleeing from one of the most powerful families in the region, carrying evidence of corporate crimes and possibly murder. "Where are we going?" she asked suddenly, realizing she had no idea where Michael was taking them. "My cabin," the older man answered. "About an hour from here, just over the county line. Victor's influence doesn't extend quite as far there. We'll be safe enough to regroup and plan our next steps." Emma leaned against her mother, her young face etched with worry. "Mom, what's happening? Who were those men at the farm?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to share with her children. They had already endured so much with their father's death. Now they were being uprooted again, thrust into a situation they couldn't possibly understand. "Remember how I told you Uncle Henry and Grandma had a disagreement?" She began carefully. "It turns out it wasn't just a disagreement. Uncle Henry discovered something bad that a powerful company was doing, something that hurt people, including Grandma. Those men at the farm work for that company, and they don't want anyone to know what they did." "Are they bad guys?" Caleb asked, his 7-year-old mind immediately framing the situation in terms he could understand. Sarah met Rachel's eyes, in the rearview mirror, seeing her own dilemma reflected there. How do you explain corporate malfeasance and environmental crimes to children? "Yes, honey," she said finally. "They are. They've hurt a lot of people and tried to hide it. But we have proof now, and we're going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Caleb nodded solemnly. Like superheroes. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. "A little bit, except instead of superpowers, we have evidence and the truth. And those are the most powerful weapons against people like the North Avens," Rachel added, turning in her seat to address the children directly. "Your uncle was very brave to collect all that evidence. He's a hero, even if most people don't know it yet." "Will we be able to go home?" Emma asked, the practical concerns of a 10-year-old cutting to the heart of their situation. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. We need to make sure it's safe first." The reality of their circumstances suddenly hit Sarah with full force. The bakery she'd fought so hard to keep afloat after David's death would be unattended indefinitely. Their home, with all their belongings and memories, sat vulnerable. The normal life she'd struggled to maintain for her children's sake had been upended in a matter of hours. "I didn't realize," she began, her voice catching. Michael met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Your uncle made provisions, Sarah. Financial arrangements for whoever inherited the farm. It's not much, but it should help while we sort this out." This revelation stunned Sarah. Even in his isolation, her uncle had thought ahead, considering the needs of the family that had abandoned him. "I still don't understand how my uncle connected with you both," she said. "The way my mother talked about him, she made it sound like he had become paranoid, isolated." "That's what North Haven wanted everyone to believe," Rachel explained, turning in her seat to face Sarah. "Your uncle's reputation was systematically undermined over years. Subtle rumors, convenient incidents, financial pressure. By the time he approached me with his evidence, most of the town already thought he was just a bitter old man with conspiracy theories." "But he found you," Sarah said, "a journalist willing to listen." Rachel nodded. "I was new to the Gazette, looking to make my mark with something bigger than church picnics and county fairs. Henry approached me carefully, shared just enough to pique my interest without revealing his full hand. It took months before he trusted me with access to his complete investigation." "And you?" Sarah asked Michael. "How did you get involved?" The older man's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I handled your family's legal affairs for years. I was there when your mother got sick, when the medical bills started piling up. Henry came to me when he first suspected the connection between Ellen's illness and the North Avon facilities upstream." Michael paused, glancing at Sarah in the rearview mirror. "I helped him file public records requests, obtain environmental testing permits, all perfectly legitimate. But when Victor Northaven realized what Henry was doing, the pressure started. Subtle at first, clients mysteriously taking their business elsewhere. Then not so subtle. My senior partners called me in and told me the firm would no longer represent Henry Mitchell. But you kept helping him anyway, Sarah guessed. Unofficially. By then, I'd seen enough evidence to believe him. And Ellen. Michael's voice softened. Your mother was a dear friend. What happened to her wasn't right. They drove in silence for several more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape gradually changed from flat farmland to more rugged, wooded terrain. Michael turned onto an unmarked gravel road that wound upward into the hills. There's something I still don't understand, Sarah said finally. If my uncle had all this evidence, why didn't he go public with it years ago? Why hide everything in a secret room? Rachel exchanged a glance with Michael. He tried initially. Approached the local paper, not me. This was before my time. The editor refused to run the story. Then he tried the county environmental board. Suddenly, all his appointments were cancelled. The state environmental agency sent an inspector who spent 15 minutes on the property and declared everything normal without taking a single sample. The Northavens blocked him at every turn. And then they started playing hardball, Michael added. Your parents' house was broken into. Nothing. Taken, just left in disarray. A message. Your father's bakery lost its major contracts overnight. The bank suddenly called in loans on equipment. The pieces fell into place in Sarah's mind. So my mother didn't leave because she thought Uncle Henry was crazy. She left because Northaven was threatening us. Your parents wanted to take Henry with them, Michael said gently, but he refused to leave. Said someone had to stay and gather evidence, build a case no one could ignore or suppress. He believed if he left, the Northavens would win permanently. The gravel road ended at a modest cabin, nestled among tall pines, simple but well-maintained, with a covered porch and a small detached garage. Michael parked and led them inside, checking carefully before unlocking the door. The interior was cozy. A main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, and doors leading to what Sarah presumed were bedrooms. One wall was covered with bookshelves, another featured topographical maps of the county. We should be safe here for now, Michael said, securing the door behind them. No one associates this place with me. It's owned through a family trust. Under my maiden name. Rachel immediately set up her laptop on the dining table. We need to catalog what we have and get it secured online. How much did you manage to grab from the archive? She asked Sarah. Sarah carefully removed the documents from inside her jacket. Not everything, but the most damning materials, the soil test results, the evidence about the Jenkins fire, the records of my mother's illness and its connection to Northaven's contaminants. Good, Rachel nodded. Between what you have there and the backup files your uncle already uploaded, we should have enough to start building our case. Case for what exactly? Sarah asked. What's our actual plan here? Rachel and Michael exchanged another look that spoke volumes. That depends partly on you, Michael said carefully. How involved you want to be. This isn't your fight, Sarah. Your uncle spent decades on this crusade. It cost him his family, nearly his sanity. No one would blame you for handing over the evidence and walking away. The suggestion was tempting. Sarah could picture it, giving everything to Rachel and Michael, returning to her orderly life in town, leaving the Northavens and their crimes. In more experienced hands, it would be the sensible choice for a single mother with 2 young children depending on her. But then she thought of her mother dying painfully from chemicals deliberately released into the water. Her uncle spending decades building a case in isolation, eventually forced into a care facility on false pretenses. Her own children growing up in a community where powerful interests could poison the vulnerable with impunity. Sarah looked At Emma and Caleb, now exploring the cabin with cautious curiosity. Everything she did for them, to protect them, to provide for them, to show them how to live with integrity in a world that often rewarded the opposite. What example would she set by walking away now? It became my fight the moment I found that key, Sarah said firmly. Tell me what we need to do. Relief showed on both their faces. First, we build a bulletproof case, Rachel said, typing rapidly on her laptop. The North Havens will have expensive lawyers who will try to discredit everything. We need irrefutable evidence, witnesses willing to come forward, recent samples showing the contamination is ongoing. Witnesses? Sarah questioned. After 30 years, and with North Haven's influence in the county, there are people who've remained silent out of fear, not loyalty, Michael explained. Former workers who helped dump chemicals, doctors who treated unusually high rates of cancer but were pressured to keep quiet, bank employees who processed questionable transactions. Getting them to speak won't be easy, Rachel acknowledged, but seeing someone finally standing up to the North Havens might embolden others. Sarah considered this. And the recent samples. Your uncle arranged for regular testing through a lab in the next state, Michael said. Paid in cash, used different names. The most recent tests were just 3 months ago, showing the contamination remains in the groundwater. Rachel looked up from her computer. Here's what we're dealing with. The evidence you recovered gives us a strong foundation, but the North Havens will claim it's all fabricated by a man with a grudge. We need corroboration from multiple sources. And we need protection, Michael added grimly. Once we start moving on this, the North Havens won't limit themselves to legal channels. They've invested too much in covering this up for too long. A chill ran through Sarah as the true danger of their situation sank in. Protection from who? The local police won't help if North Haven owns them. I have contacts at the state level, Rachel said. People outside North Haven's sphere of influence, but they'll need something solid before they'll act. Political figures don't stick their necks out based on historical allegations alone. So we're back to needing current evidence, Sarah mused. She thought for a moment, her mind analyzing the problem methodically, a skill she'd developed running a business while raising 2 children alone. What about the current owners of the affected properties, she suggested. The farms and homes in areas where North Haven dumped their waste. Do they know what's in their soil and water? Rachel's expression brightened. That's actually brilliant. North Haven sold off most of those properties once they'd consolidated their holdings, broken into smaller parcels, sold to unsuspecting buyers over the decades. If we can show the contamination affects current landowners, it becomes a present-day public health crisis, not just historical wrongdoing. Environmental agencies would have to respond, Michael finished, nodding appreciatively. Sarah felt a spark of hope. My uncle must have records of all the affected properties, right? We could organize testing across multiple sites simultaneously, create a contamination map that couldn't be ignored. It could work, Rachel agreed, typing notes, but we'd need to move quickly before the North Havens realize what we're doing. Michael looked troubled. Victor North Haven has already seen us together. He knows we have some of Henry's evidence. We might have less time than we think. As if in answer to his concern, Rachel's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her expression darkened as she read it. What is it? Sarah asked. My contact at the Gazette. North Haven representatives just showed up at the newspaper office with a cease and desist letter, threatening a defamation lawsuit if any unsubstantiated allegations about the family or company are published. She looked up grimly. They're moving faster than I expected, and that's just the official response, Michael said. I guarantee they're taking other actions we can't see yet. Sarah felt a new determination hardening within her. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, she knew what had to be done. Then we need to move faster too, she declared. My uncle spent years gathering evidence while the North Avens blocked him at every turn. We don't have that luxury. What are you suggesting? Rachel asked. Sarah had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges before: her husband's sudden death, the struggle to save the bakery, raising 2 children alone. Each time, she had found strength she didn't know she possessed. A different approach, she said decisively. Instead of trying to build a perfect case before going public, what if we use strategic exposure to force the issue, release enough evidence to attract attention from authorities outside North Avon's influence, while holding back our strongest proof to counter their inevitable denials? Rachel considered this risky. We'd be showing our hand early. But we'd be controlling the narrative, Sarah argued. Right now, they're assuming we'll follow the same playbook my uncle did: careful evidence gathering, official channels, systems they know how to manipulate. They won't expect us to go straight to the public. It could work, Michael said slowly, especially if we focus on the current contamination affecting present-day residents. That creates immediate pressure for official action. Rachel nodded, warming to the idea. I have contacts at regional news outlets, environmental advocacy groups. We could orchestrate a coordinated release, enough different sources that the North Avens couldn't silence them all. For the first time since discovering the hidden room that morning, Sarah felt like they might actually have a chance. The North Avens had spent decades perfecting their system of influence and intimidation, but they'd never faced the kind of immediate, widespread exposure that modern media could create. How quickly can we move? She asked. Give me 48 hours to organize the media contacts, Rachel said. Michael, can you reach out to your connections at the environmental testing lab? See if they can expedite analysis of our most recent samples. The older man nodded. And I'll start preparing legal frameworks for affected property owners who may want to join a class action once this becomes public. They worked late into the evening, organizing documents, creating digital backups, and developing their strategy. Michael found activities to keep Emma and Caleb occupied, showing a grandfather's intuition for what would engage children processing their second major disruption in less than a year. As night fell, Sarah stepped onto the cabin's porch, needing a moment alone to absorb everything that had happened. The stars shone brilliantly in the clear mountain air, so different from the muted night sky of town. In the distance, an owl called, its melancholy song echoing through the pines. Sarah thought about the bakery she'd fought so hard to keep after David's death. The early mornings mixing dough, the satisfaction of watching customers enjoy her creations, the relief of making each month's rent payment. It had been exhausting, thankless work at times, but it had been hers, a legacy she could someday pass to her children. Now she had inherited a different legacy, one of secrets and corruption, of justice delayed but perhaps not denied. Not the inheritance she would have chosen, but one she could no longer ignore. Beautiful night, Michael said, joining her on the porch with 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to Sarah. Chamomile. Helps with the overwhelm. Thank you, Sarah said, accepting the tea gratefully. For everything. I still can't believe all this was happening while I was growing up. That my mother died because of North Haven's chemicals. Not some rare genetic condition. Michael leaned against the porch railing. Your mother wanted to protect you from the truth. She believed if you knew, you might someday try to continue Henry's fight, and she'd seen what the North Avens were capable of. But she kept the connection to Uncle Henry completely secret. I grew up thinking he was just some eccentric relative we didn't talk about. She could have told me something. Fear makes people do things they later regret, Michael said gently. Ellen was terrified the North Havens would come after you if there was any connection. Cutting ties completely seemed like the only way to keep you safe. Sarah sipped her tea, letting the warm liquid and Michael's words soothe her sense of betrayal. I understand why she did it. I wish I'd known him. The real him, not the caricature I grew up imagining. You would have liked him, Michael smiled. Stubborn as hell, but principled, loyal to the point of self-sacrifice. You remind me of him, the way you've stepped up to this fight without hesitation. I haven't had much choice, Sarah admitted. Ever since David died, it's been one crisis after another. You either step up or you crumble. That's not true, Michael countered. Many people would have handed over the evidence and walked away. You chose to stay and fight for your mother, for your uncle, for every family affected by North Haven's crimes. That's a choice, and a brave one. Inside the cabin, Rachel was still working, the glow of her laptop visible through the window. Beyond the porch, deep in the surrounding woods, Sarah thought she glimpsed movement, perhaps a deer, or just shadows playing tricks in the moonlight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. The North Havens wouldn't surrender their power without a fight. But for the first time since discovering the hidden room beneath the barn, Sarah felt ready. Not fearless. Fear was a constant companion for a single mother, but determined, focused, and surprisingly strong. The inheritance she had reluctantly accepted had become more than a burden. It had become a mission, not just to expose past wrongs, but to protect her children's future and the future of every family in Willowbrook Valley. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her through the hardest year of her life. In the quiet mountain night, surrounded by allies she hadn't known existed just hours ago, Sarah Mitchell began to understand that sometimes our greatest strength emerges not from what we seek, but from what finds us when we least expect it, like a hidden room beneath an old barn, or a purpose that transcends our carefully constructed plans. The first light of dawn painted the mountain cabin in soft gold as Sarah stood at the kitchen window, cradling a mug of coffee between her hands. She had slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by hidden rooms and faceless figures in pursuit. Emma and Caleb still slumbered peacefully in the small bedroom Michael had prepared for them, exhausted from the previous day's upheaval. "You're up early," Rachel observed, joining her at the window. The journalist looked remarkably alert, despite having worked well past midnight. "Old habits," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Bakers don't get the luxury of sleeping in." The thought of her bakery sitting dark and empty sent a pang through her chest. The morning crumb had been her husband David's dream first, a cozy neighborhood spot where people could gather over fresh pastries and good coffee. After his death, keeping it alive had become Sarah's way of preserving a piece of him, of showing her children that life could continue even after unimaginable loss. Now it was just one more thing the North Havens had taken from her. "We've made progress overnight," Rachel said, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. She placed her laptop on the kitchen table, screen illuminated with charts and documents. "I've been organizing your uncle's digital files." The man was meticulous. 30 years of water and soil samples, all catalogued by date and location. Sarah leaned over to examine the screen. "These red markers, what do they represent?" "Cancer clusters," Rachel replied grimly. "Each dot is a family affected by rare cancers consistent with chemical exposure. The pattern follows the watershed downstream from 3 primary North Haven dumping sites. The visualization made the human cost painfully clear. Dozens of red dots scattered across the valley, each representing a family like her own, lives cut short or forever altered by corporate greed. "How did they get away with this for so long?" Sarah whispered. "Money, influence, and strategic isolation of the victims," Michael answered, emerging from his room. Despite his age, he moved with the energy of a man with renewed purpose. They created a narrative that Henry was unstable, that the cancer clusters were random statistical anomalies. People who raised questions found themselves facing financial pressure, mysterious accidents, or public ridicule. Classic tactics of powerful entities threatened by truth, Rachel added. Discredit the messenger, obscure the evidence, create doubt where there should be certainty. The strategy session that followed was interrupted by the children waking, hungry and disoriented in the unfamiliar surroundings. Sarah paused to prepare breakfast, finding unexpected comfort in the simple act of measuring flour and heating a pan. Some problems couldn't be solved with baking, but the familiar routine steadied her nerves for what was to come. As Emma and Caleb ate, Michael spread a large map of Willowbrook Valley across the dining table. "These are the properties most severely affected by contamination," he explained, circling several areas with a red marker. "Based on Henry's records, these 5 locations would give us the strongest current evidence if we can obtain fresh samples." "Who owns them now?" Sarah asked. Rachel consulted her notes. 2 are residential developments built in the early 2000s. One is a community park donated by Surprise, North Haven Industries, as a community investment. The 4th is still agricultural, owned by Westridge Farms, a North Haven subsidiary, operating through a shell company. And the 5th is the Willowbrook Elementary School, Michael finished quietly. Sarah's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "The elementary school? My children's school?" Rachel nodded grimly. "Built 15 years ago on land formerly owned by the Jenkins family, the ones who died in the accidental fire after filing complaints about water contamination." The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow. Not only had North Haven poisoned her mother, but her children had been attending school on contaminated ground. How many other families remained unaware of the invisible danger threatening their children every day? "We need those samples immediately," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging within her. "And we need to get them tested before the North Havens realize what we're doing." "I've already reached out to my contact at Eastern State Environmental Laboratory," Michael reported. "Dr. Elaine Wong. She's agreed to prioritize our samples if we can get them to her today. I'll handle the school and park," Rachel volunteered. "I can pose as a journalist doing a feature on community green spaces, technically not even a lie." "The residential areas will be trickier," Michael cautioned. Showing up with sample collection equipment would raise immediate questions. Sarah considered the problem from multiple angles, a skill honed by years of adapting to life's unexpected challenges. "What about the water utility? Don't they do routine testing?" Michael's eyes lit up. "My nephew Marcus works for County Water Management. He could collect samples under the guise of routine quality monitoring." "That leaves the Westridge Farms property," Rachel noted. "It'll be heavily secured. North Haven doesn't take chances. With their own holdings." Sarah remembered something from her uncle's journals. There was a creek running through the Riverstone Farm property that connects to Westridge land. If the contamination is in the groundwater, then the creek would carry traces downstream where we could access it from public land, Michael finished, nodding appreciatively. "Your uncle's strategic thinking lives on in you, Sarah." The plan came together rapidly. Michael would contact his nephew about the residential samples, Rachel would handle the school and park, and Sarah would return to Riverstone Farm to collect creek water samples. It was risky splitting up, but time was their enemy. The North Havens were already moving to contain the situation. "I'm coming with you," Rachel insisted when Sarah proposed returning to the farm alone. "Victor North Haven has already shown his hand there. It's too dangerous." "And my children," Sarah countered. "I can't take them back to the farm, but I can't leave them unprotected either." "My sister lives 30 minutes from here," Michael offered. retired school principal, tough as nails, and has no connection to this situation that North Haven could trace. The children would be safe with her for a few hours. Sarah hesitated, torn between her instinct to keep Emma and Caleb close and the urgent need to gather evidence before it was too late. In the 8 months since David's death, she had rarely been separated from them, as if her constant presence could somehow compensate for their father's absence. Emma, sensing her mother's dilemma, approached the table where the adults were huddled. "We'll be okay, Mom," she said, with a maturity that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "You're getting evidence to stop the bad people who hurt Grandma, right?" Out of the mouths of babes came the clarity Sarah needed. "That's right, sweetheart. And I need you to be brave for just a little while longer." After ensuring the children were safely settled with Michael's sister, a formidable woman who received them with no questions asked beyond, "What time will you return?" Sarah and Rachel headed back toward Riverstone Farm in Rachel's weathered Jeep. "Victor won't be expecting us to return so soon," Rachel reasoned as they navigated the winding mountain roads. "He'll assume we're hiding, regrouping. The farm is the last place he'll look for us right now." "Unless he has it under surveillance," Sarah pointed out. "Possible, but his resources aren't unlimited. He's likely focused on damage control, pressuring officials, preparing legal defenses, monitoring normal channels where we might surface." They approached Riverstone Farm from a back road, parking the Jeep in a wooded area and hiking the final quarter-mile to minimize the chance of detection. The farm looked eerily peaceful in the afternoon light, no sign of North Haven's presence. "The creek runs behind the eastern field," Sarah whispered as they crouched at the property's edge. "We can follow the tree line for cover." Armed with sample collection kits provided by Michael's contact at the environmental lab, they moved cautiously across the property, hyper-aware of every sound. The creek was exactly where Sarah remembered from her uncle's maps, a modest stream, cutting through the far corner of the property before continuing toward what was now Westridge Farms land. "Perfect," Rachel murmured as they knelt beside the gently flowing water. "This is exactly what we need." Following the laboratory's protocols, they collected multiple water samples, carefully labeling each with location coordinates. Sarah also gathered soil samples from the creek bank, working with the methodical precision she normally applied to perfecting bread recipes. "We should check the well too," Sarah suggested, once they'd secured the creek samples. "If the groundwater is contaminated, the farm's drinking water would show higher concentrations." The farmhouse well was located near the kitchen garden, an area now overgrown with weeds, but once carefully tended by Sarah's grandmother. As they approached, Rachel suddenly grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her down behind a half-collapsed stone wall. "Someone's inside the house," she hissed, pointing to a shadowy movement visible through the kitchen window. Sarah's heart raced as they watched a figure move through the downstairs rooms, too far away to identify clearly, but definitely not Victor Northaven's distinctive silver-haired silhouette. "Daniel Northaven," Sarah whispered. Rachel shook her head. "Wrong build. This could be security personnel or someone else looking for evidence," Sarah finished, struck by sudden inspiration. "Not everyone in this town is in North Haven's pocket. My uncle must have had allies, besides you and Michael." "Risky assumption," Rachel cautioned, "but we need that well water sample." They waited, watching the figure methodically search the house. After 20 tense minutes, the unknown visitor emerged onto the back porch, and Sarah stifled a gasp of recognition. "That's Dr. Patel," she whispered. "Our family physician. He treated my mother before we moved away." Dr. Patel, now in his 60s, but still possessing the erect posture and purposeful movement Sarah remembered, scanned the property before descending the porch steps. He carried a small leather satchel close to his body, moving with the urgency of someone who knew they were somewhere they shouldn't be. "What would your doctor be doing here?" Rachel wondered. "Let's find out," Sarah decided, standing before Rachel could stop her. "Dr. Patel," she called, keeping her voice low but audible. The physician froze, then spun toward the sound, his face registering shock and then, remarkably, relief. "Sarah Mitchell," he breathed as she approached, recognition immediate despite the years that had passed. "I heard you had inherited the property, but I didn't expect to find you here. Not after Victor Northaven paid us a visit yesterday?" Sarah supplied. "What are you doing here, Dr. Patel?" The doctor glanced nervously around before responding. "The same thing you are, I suspect. Looking for evidence. Henry Mitchell wasn't the only one keeping records of Northaven's activities. This revelation opened an entirely new dimension to their investigation. Dr. Patel quickly explained that he had been tracking unusual disease patterns in Willowbrook Valley for decades, compiling his own database of cancer cases, birth defects, and other conditions linked to chemical exposure. "I couldn't prove the connection officially," he admitted, as they moved to the relative safety of the barn to continue their conversation. "Northaven's influence runs too deep, but I've been collecting patient data, tissue samples, water testing results, anything that might someday build a case." "And you came here looking for my uncle's research," Sarah realized. Dr. Patel nodded. "When I heard Henry had passed and you had inherited the farm, I feared his evidence might be lost forever. The Mitchells weren't the only family forced to leave Willowbrook because they asked too many questions." With Rachel recording every word, Dr. Patel revealed a pattern of intimidation and cover-ups spanning decades. As one of the town's senior physicians, he had witnessed firsthand the human cost of Northaven's environmental crimes. Children with rare cancers, pregnant women suffering miscarriages at alarming rates, elderly residents developing mysterious neurological conditions. "Your mother's case was what finally convinced me something sinister was happening," he told Sarah. "Ellen was young, healthy, with no family history of cancer. Then, within months of Northaven expanding their operations, upstream from this farm, she developed an aggressive form that matched patterns I was seeing in other patients near contamination sites." "Why didn't you come forward?" Rachel asked, her journalist's instinct for the hard question asserting itself. Dr. Patel's expression reflected decades of moral compromise. "Fear, at first. I had a family to protect. Then strategy. I realized I could do more good documenting patterns from the inside than being silenced like Henry. I've helped dozens of families get diagnoses and treatments they might otherwise have been denied. But never publicly linked the cases to Northaven," Sarah observed, her tone more sad than accusing. "No," the doctor acknowledged, "that would have ended my practice and my ability to help anyone." He opened his satchel, revealing a portable hard drive. "But I've kept everything, Sarah. Every case, every test result, every statistical analysis showing disease clusters around Northaven facilities. And now I'm ready to come forward." This unexpected ally transformed their position dramatically. Dr. Patel's medical credentials and decades of systematic documentation would be far harder for Northaven to dismiss than the alleged conspiracy theories of a reclusive farmer. While Rachel interviewed the doctor in greater detail, Sarah completed their original mission, collecting well water samples and additional soil specimens from around the property. The sun was dipping toward the horizon when they finally prepared to leave, the precious samples and Dr. Patel's hard drive secured in Rachel's backpack. "You should come with us," Sarah urged the physician. "It's not safe for you here once Northaven realizes you've joined us." Dr. Patel nodded grimly. "I've made preparations. My family is already visiting relatives in another state. Once this Brakes, there's no going back for any of us." They were about to depart when the distant sound of vehicles approaching froze them in place. Through the barn's weather-worn boards, they observed two black SUVs turning into the farm's long driveway, the unmistakable signature of North Haven security. "The back tunnel," Sarah whispered urgently, leading them toward the feed bin and its hidden entrance. "We can escape through the storm cellar." They descended into darkness, just as footsteps crunched across the gravel outside the barn. Sarah led the way through the underground archive room and into the narrow tunnel beyond, Dr. Patel's labored breathing echoing in the confined space as they hurried toward safety. Behind them, muffled voices and the sound of the barn being searched lent desperate energy to their escape. The tunnel seemed longer than Sarah remembered, the darkness more oppressive. But finally they emerged through the storm cellar doors and into the gathering dusk. "My car is parked a quarter-mile through those trees," Dr. Patel whispered. "I can take you to it without crossing open ground." They followed the physician's lead, moving swiftly through the deepening shadows. Behind them, flashlight beams swept the farmyard as North Haven's men expanded their search. The margin between discovery and escape had never felt so thin. Dr. Patel's sedan was hidden on an overgrown logging track, invisible from the main road. As they pulled away, headlights off until they were safely distant, Sarah felt the weight of the day's discoveries pressing upon her. They had evidence now, physical samples and Dr. Patel's decades of medical documentation, but they also had North Haven's full attention and unmistakable confirmation that the company would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. "Where to now?" Dr. Patel asked as they reached the highway. "Eastern State Environmental Lab," Rachel directed. "We need to get these samples processed immediately." The laboratory was a 2-hour drive, located in the neighboring state where North Haven's influence was significantly weaker. Dr. Elaine Wong, Michael's contact, met them personally at the facility's service entrance, bypassing normal intake procedures, to expedite their testing. "I can have preliminary results by morning," she promised, carefully logging each sample. "And I've arranged for a colleague at the CDC to independently verify our findings. If what you're suggesting is true, this goes beyond local environmental contamination. It's a public health crisis demanding federal intervention." Sarah watched the scientist work, struck by how many people had been fighting this battle in isolation. Her uncle, Dr. Patel, Michael, Rachel, and now Dr. Wong. Each had carried a piece of the truth, unable alone to assemble the complete picture, or gather enough influence to challenge North Haven's power. "Strength in unity," she murmured. "What's that?" Rachel asked, looking up from her notes. "Something my husband used to say when the bakery was struggling. No single ingredient makes the bread rise, Sarah. It's the combination working together. We've been trying to fight North Haven as individuals, but together we have a chance," Rachel finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "And I think it's time we expanded our alliance even further." While Dr. Wong began processing the samples, Rachel used the laboratory's secure internet connection to reach out to her network of journalists and environmental activists. The story she crafted was compelling in its simplicity. A powerful corporation had poisoned a community for decades, and a coalition of ordinary citizens, a widow, a doctor, an attorney, a journalist, had uncovered the evidence to prove it. "We go public tomorrow," Rachel announced after an hour of intense communication. Simultaneous releases across 5 regional news outlets, plus an environmental justice organization with national reach. "Dr. Patel has agreed to be our named medical source, and Dr. Wong will provide the scientific analysis of our samples." "What about my children?" Sarah asked, the weight of parental responsibility never far from her thoughts. "Once this breaks, North Haven will know exactly who's behind it." "Michael has already arranged protective custody through the state attorney. General's office, Rachel assured her. As soon as we have the lab results, we're meeting with a special prosecutor who handles environmental crimes. Your children will have round-the-clock protection. Dr. Patel, who had been conferring with Dr. Wong about testing protocols, joined them with renewed purpose in his tired eyes. I've waited 30 years to tell this story, Sarah. Your uncle never lived to see this day, but he made it possible. Without his evidence, his persistence, we would still be where we were when your mother first fell ill, suspecting the truth but unable to prove it. Sarah thought of the hidden room beneath the barn, of her uncle spending decades meticulously documenting a crime most people refused to acknowledge. She thought of her mother, forced to choose between fighting a powerful enemy and protecting her daughter. She thought of all the families like hers, ordinary people whose lives had been irreparably damaged by corporate greed and callous indifference. We need to tell their stories too, she said suddenly. Not just the scientific evidence and medical data, but the human cost. The families who lost children, parents, spouses, the lives disrupted and dreams destroyed. People need to understand. This isn't just about chemical compounds and contamination levels. It's about real people suffering real harm. Rachel's expression shifted from surprise to respect. You're right. Facts and figures only go so far. But personal testimonies, those are harder to dismiss. She hesitated. Would you be willing to tell your mother's story? Your family's story? The question gave Sarah pause. Going public would mean exposing her children to unwanted attention, reopening wounds barely beginning to heal, making herself a target for North Haven's inevitable counterattack. The safer path would be to remain anonymous, to let others be the public face of the fight. But then she remembered Emma's words from that morning. You're getting evidence to stop the bad people who hurt Grandma, right? Such clarity of purpose from a child too young to fully understand the complexities of corporate malfeasance and environmental justice, yet old enough to recognize the fundamental truth. Some fights cannot be avoided without surrendering something essential. Yes, Sarah decided. I'll tell our story for my mother, for my uncle, for my children. Some inheritances come with responsibilities that can't be declined. The night stretched into early morning as they prepared for the day ahead. Rachel crafted press releases and coordinated with her media contacts. Dr. Patel organized his medical documentation into compelling presentations of evidence. Sarah worked on drafting her personal testimony, finding strength in translating private grief into public purpose. Shortly after dawn, Michael arrived with news from his nephew. The residential water samples had been successfully collected and delivered to a second laboratory for confirmation testing. He brought clothes for Sarah and supplies for the children, his practical support a reminder that even in crisis, life's basic needs continued. How are Emma and Caleb? Sarah asked immediately. Safe and surprisingly resilient, Michael assured her. Emma's helping my sister bake cookies, and Caleb has discovered the joys of a backyard tire swing. Children adapt better than we sometimes give them credit for. Dr. Wong joined them, her expression serious but eyes bright with professional excitement. The preliminary results are in, she announced, and they confirm everything you've alleged. The water samples from Riverstone Farm show chemical contamination at levels 40 times the legal limit. The soil samples contain heavy metals and industrial compounds consistent with North Haven's manufacturing processes. She spread charts and analysis printouts across the conference room table. Most concerning are the samples from the creek leading to Westridge Farm's property. The contamination gradient increases dramatically as the water approaches North Haven's current facilities, suggesting ongoing dumping, not just historical pollution. So they're still doing it, Sarah breathed. After all these years, all the evidence of harm, they're still poisoning the water. Corporate recidivism is unfortunately common in environmental cases, Dr. Wong explained. Many companies calculate that occasional fines are simply a cost of doing business, cheaper than proper waste disposal or manufacturing process modifications. But this goes beyond regulatory violations, Rachel pointed out, studying the data. If these levels are present in the school grounds and residential areas, then we're looking at an active public health emergency, Dr. Wong confirmed. I've already filed preliminary reports with the State Environmental Protection Agency and the CDC's Environmental Health Division. They'll be legally obligated to investigate, regardless of North Haven's influence. The laboratory's conference room phone rang, startling them all. Dr. Wong answered, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to concern as she listened. "It's for you," she said, holding the receiver toward Rachel. "A reporter from the Willowbrook Gazette says it's urgent." Rachel took the call, her face growing increasingly grim. When she hung up, the tension in the room was palpable. "North Haven's making their move," she reported. "They've called a press conference for noon today to address irresponsible rumors and malicious falsehoods about their environmental record. They're positioning themselves as victims of a defamation campaign orchestrated by business competitors." "Classic preemptive strike," Michael observed. "They're trying to control the narrative before our story breaks." "There's more," Rachel continued. "My source says Victor Northaven personally visited the Gazette's publisher this morning. The paper's been instructed not to run any stories about chemical contamination or health concerns without definitive proof reviewed by North Haven's scientific team." "They're circling the wagons," Dr. Patel said. "Once they realized we had returned to the farm, they must have accelerated their containment strategy." Sarah absorbed this information, feeling the momentum shifting beneath them. North Haven was powerful, practiced at deflecting threats to their reputation and bottom line. If they successfully painted the emerging evidence as fabricated or exaggerated, before the full story broke, public opinion might solidify against them. But unlike her uncle 30 years ago, they weren't fighting alone or through conventional channels North Haven controlled. They had multiple laboratories processing evidence, journalists in 5 cities preparing to publish, environmental agencies legally obligated to investigate, and most importantly, the truth, documented, verified, and undeniable. "Let them have their press conference," Sarah said with quiet determination. "While they're denying everything to the local media they control, we'll be telling the real story to the world." Dr. Wong's printer hummed as it produced the final laboratory reports. Dr. Patel organized decades of medical records into clear patterns of cause and effect. Rachel finalized press packets for distribution across multiple platforms. Michael prepared legal briefs for the State Attorney General's Environmental Crimes Unit. And Sarah Mitchell, who had arrived at Riverstone Farm expecting only to clear out an old house, stood at the center of it all. An ordinary woman transformed by extraordinary circumstances into the voice her mother and uncle had been denied. The hidden room beneath the barn had revealed more than just evidence of corporate crimes. It had revealed her own capacity for courage, for leadership, for turning inherited trauma into purposeful action. As they prepared to leave for their meeting with the special prosecutor, Sarah thought of Emma and Caleb, of the future they deserved, one free from invisible poisons and powerful interests who viewed human lives as acceptable collateral damage. The inheritance she had reluctantly accepted had become a sacred trust, not just to expose past wrongs, but to prevent future ones. "We're ready," Rachel announced, gathering the final documents. "It's time." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over her. The path ahead would be difficult, dangerous, and uncertain. North Haven would fight with every resource at their command. But for the first time in decades, the truth about Willowbrook Valley would not be buried in a hidden room or silenced by fear and isolation. It would be spoken aloud, in broad daylight, by those who had suffered and those who had witnessed. And once spoken, it could never be unheard. The State Attorney General's regional office buzzed with unusual activity for a Tuesday morning. Sarah Mitchell sat in a conference room, surrounded by allies who, just 3 days ago, had been strangers. Rachel Torres arranged recording equipment, while Michael Donovan organized stacks of documents with Dr. Patel. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see officials moving with purpose, answering phones, consulting in hushed voices. The gravity of what they were about to do settled over her like a physical weight. In less than an hour, news outlets across the region would simultaneously publish exposés on North Haven Industries' decades of environmental crimes. The State Environmental Protection Agency would announce an emergency investigation into contamination at Willowbrook Elementary School and surrounding properties. And Sarah, a widow who had only wanted to clear out an inherited farmhouse and return to her bakery, would become the public face of a battle against one of the region's most powerful corporations. "Are you ready?" Rachel asked, touching Sarah's shoulder gently. Sarah thought of her children, now under state protection at a location known only to those in this room. She thought of her mother, whose life had been cut short by North Haven's callous disregard for human life. She thought of her uncle, who had spent decades documenting crimes no one would acknowledge. "I've been ready since I found that hidden room," she replied with quiet determination. Special Prosecutor Evelyn Marsh entered the conference room with a purposeful stride. In her mid-50s, with steel-grey hair and piercing eyes, she radiated the confident authority of someone who had faced powerful adversaries before and prevailed. "The lab results are irrefutable," she announced without preamble. "We have environmental crimes at 9 separate locations, evidence of deliberate contaminations spanning 3 decades, and a clear pattern of corporate knowledge and cover-up." She placed a thick folder on the conference table. "The Attorney General has authorized immediate action. Search warrants for North Haven's corporate headquarters and manufacturing facilities, cease and desist orders for operations at 3 sites, and emergency testing of all public water systems within a 20-mile radius of their plants." "And the school?" Sarah asked, thinking of the hundreds of children potentially exposed every day. "Environmental teams are already on site, working with school officials to implement emergency protocols. If contamination levels match what we found in the preliminary samples, the building will be closed immediately and temporary facilities arranged for students." The rapid response exceeded Sarah's expectations. After decades of North Haven successfully blocking investigations and silencing critics, the dam had finally broken. Dr. Wong's laboratory results, combined with Dr. Patel's medical documentation and Henry Mitchell's meticulous records, had created an evidence package too compelling to ignore and too comprehensive to dismiss. "What about North Haven's press conference?" Rachel asked, checking her watch. "They're scheduled to start in 20 minutes. Prosecutor Marsh's expression shifted to something resembling satisfaction. "Let them have their moment denying everything. Our teams will be serving warrants at their headquarters, while Victor North Haven is still at the podium." The timing was perfect. North Haven would be publicly claiming innocence, even as state investigators were uncovering evidence of guilt. The contrast would be devastating to the company's credibility. "And now," Marsh continued, "we need to discuss your testimony, Mrs. Mitchell. Your personal connection to this case adds an essential human dimension to what might otherwise be perceived as abstract environmental regulations and technical violations." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I'll tell them everything about my mother's illness, my uncle's investigation, what I found in the hidden room. But I want to speak for the other families too. The ones who might not even know they've been affected." "That's exactly what we need," Marsh agreed. "The human cost has been buried for too long." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation, reviewing key points, organizing the sequence of speakers, coordinating with media liaisons. At precisely 11:30, Rachel's phone lit up with a message from her contact at the Willowbrook Gazette. "North Haven's press conference has started," she reported. "Victor's making a statement about baseless accusations and the company's unblemished environmental record." Michael checked his own phone. "My contact at the state police confirms the warrant teams are in position, waiting for the signal to enter North Haven headquarters." Prosecutor Marsh nodded and made a brief call. "It's time," she announced. "Let's proceed with our statement." They moved to a larger conference room where media representatives from regional and national outlets had assembled. Cameras whirred to life as Marsh approached the podium, her expression solemn yet resolute. "Good morning. I'm Special Prosecutor Evelyn Marsh with the State Attorney General's Environmental Crimes Division. Today, we are announcing the launch of a major investigation into allegations of systematic environmental contamination, public health endangerment, and corporate malfeasance by North Haven Industries spanning more than 3 decades. As Marsh outlined the preliminary findings and immediate actions being taken, Sarah watched the reporter's expressions shift from professional detachment to growing shock. This wasn't just another corporate fine or regulatory slap on the wrist. This was potentially one of the largest environmental crime cases in state history. The evidence we've gathered suggests a deliberate pattern of toxic waste dumping in residential areas, contamination of public water supplies, and a coordinated effort to conceal these activities from regulators and the public. Marsh continued. Most disturbing is the evidence indicating North Haven Industries has been aware of the severe health impacts of their actions, including elevated cancer rates in affected communities, yet continued these practices while actively working to discredit those who raised concerns. A reporter raised her hand. "Are we talking about isolated incidents or a systematic pattern?" "We have documented evidence of contamination at no fewer than 27 distinct locations across Willowbrook Valley," Marsh replied. "Laboratory analysis confirms the presence of toxic compounds directly traceable to North Haven's manufacturing processes. This was not accidental or incidental pollution. It appears to have been deliberate and sustained over decades." Another reporter leaned forward. "You mentioned health impacts. How severe are we talking?" This was the moment Sarah had prepared for. Marsh gestured her forward, and Sarah approached the podium, her heart racing but her voice steady as she introduced herself. "My mother, Ellen Mitchell, died of a rare form of cancer when I was 8 years old," she began. "We were told it was a genetic anomaly, a tragic but random occurrence. What we weren't told was that our family farm's water supply had been deliberately contaminated by North Haven Industries' illegal dumping practices upstream from our property." The room fell silent as Sarah recounted her discovery of the hidden room beneath her uncle's barn, the decades of evidence he had compiled, and the pattern of illness and death that had followed North Haven's toxic trail through the community. "I inherited more than just a farm," she said, her voice gathering strength. "I inherited the truth my uncle fought to preserve and the responsibility to ensure that what happened to my mother doesn't continue happening to other families. There are children right now, including my own, who have been attending school on contaminated ground. There are families drinking water and growing gardens in soil poisoned by corporate greed and indifference." Dr. Patel followed with his testimony, the medical evidence presented in clear, compelling terms that left little room for doubt or dismissal. Rachel provided context from her years investigating North Haven, and Michael explained the legal significance of the documentation they had uncovered. As the press conference concluded and reporters rushed to file their stories, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from the protective detail watching her children. Attached was a photo of Emma and Caleb, playing a board game with their guardian, smiling and safe, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in their community. They deserve to grow up in a world where the powerful can't poison the vulnerable with impunity, she whispered to herself, renewing her commitment to see this through no matter what came next. What came next arrived sooner than expected. As they left the Attorney General's office, Rachel received an urgent call from her editor. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a live video feed on her phone. Victor Northaven stood before a hastily assembled crowd outside Northaven headquarters, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled fury. Behind him, state investigators could be seen carrying boxes of documents from the building. This politically motivated witch hunt is a direct attack on the thousands of hard-working employees of Northaven Industries and the community we have proudly served for generations, he declared, his voice tight with anger. These outrageous allegations are based on fabricated evidence provided by individuals with personal vendettas against our company. We categorically deny any wrongdoing and will vigorously defend our reputation and record. A reporter shouted from the crowd, "What about the lab results showing toxic contamination at Willowbrook Elementary School?" Victor's expression flickered momentarily before he regained control. Any environmental issues at the school are historical in nature, predating our involvement with the property. Northaven Industries has always adhered to the strictest environmental standards, often exceeding regulatory requirements. Another voice called out, "Is it true your company deliberately targeted Henry Mitchell's farm with toxic runoff after he began investigating your dumping practices?" This question clearly caught Victor off guard. His face paled slightly as he searched for the source of the question. That is a preposterous and defamatory claim, with absolutely no basis in fact. Mr. Mitchell was a troubled individual with a history of making unfounded accusations against numerous local businesses. The camera panned to show Daniel Northaven emerging from the building, engaged in an intense conversation with a man in a suit who appeared to be an attorney. Their expressions conveyed the gravity of the situation unfolding around them. "They're scrambling," Michael observed. "The warrant execution caught them completely by surprise." "Look at Victor's face," Rachel added. "He's not just angry, he's scared. He knows what those investigators are going to find." Sarah watched the scene with mixed emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing the beginning of accountability after so many years of impunity, but also a sobering recognition of the battle still ahead. Northaven wouldn't surrender without deploying every resource at their disposal. "What happens now?" she asked Prosecutor Marsh, who had joined them to watch the feed. "Now comes the difficult part," Marsh replied candidly. "Northaven will hire the best attorneys money can buy. They'll challenge every piece of evidence, question every testing methodology, attack the credibility of every witness. They'll file motions to delay and obstruct. They'll leverage political connections and economic influence to pressure officials at every level." "Will it work?" Sarah asked, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her again. Marsh's expression was grim, but determined. "It might have before, but this time we have something they can't easily overcome. Irrefutable scientific evidence, medical documentation spanning decades, and most importantly, public awareness. Once the community understands what's been happening, there's no going back to business as usual." The prosecutor's words proved prophetic. Over the next 72 hours, Willowbrook Valley transformed from a quiet community largely deferential to its major employer into a hotbed of activism and outrage. The temporary closure of Willowbrook Elementary School, pending complete environmental remediation, sent shockwaves through the community. Parents who had sent their children to the school for years demanded answers about potential health impacts. Local physicians, emboldened by Dr. Patel's example, began reviewing cases of unusual illnesses that might be connected to environmental exposure. When preliminary testing revealed contamination in residential water supplies in 3 neighborhoods near North Haven facilities, public anger escalated to outright fury. Community meetings overflowed with residents sharing stories of unexplained illnesses, suspicious patterns of health problems, and previous attempts to raise concerns that had been dismissed or suppressed. Sarah found herself at the center of this awakening, her personal story resonating with families who saw reflections of their own experiences in her mother's illness and her uncle's isolated struggle. The baker, who had wanted nothing more than to clear out an old farmhouse, had become a reluctant symbol of resistance against corporate power. 5 days after the initial press conference, Sarah returned to the Morning Crumb for the first time since discovering the hidden room. The bakery had been closed during her absence, but loyal customers had taped notes of support to the door and windows. "Standing with you, Sarah," read one. "Thank you for telling the truth," declared another. Inside, the familiar sense of yeast and flour welcomed her home. Sarah ran her hand along the worn countertop, remembering David's pride when they had first opened the bakery, his unwavering belief that they were creating more than just a business. They were building a community gathering place where neighbors became friends over coffee and fresh bread. "He would be so proud of you," said a voice from the doorway. Sarah turned to find Margaret, her elderly neighbor and the bakery's first customer on opening day 3 years ago. "I'm not sure about that," Sarah admitted. "The bakery's been closed for days. We're probably going to lose money this month." Margaret shook her head, stepping into the warm space. "That's not what I meant, dear. David always said you had more courage than anyone he'd ever met. My wife thinks she's just stubborn," he told me once, "but what she calls stubbornness, I call refusing to back down when it matters." "This matters, Sarah. What you're doing matters." The simple validation brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. The past week had been so focused on evidence and testimony, legal strategies and media statements, that she'd hardly had time to process her own emotional journey. "I didn't want any of this," she confessed. "I just wanted to clear out the farm and move on with our lives." Sometimes life gives us the mission we need, not the one we want, Margaret said with the wisdom of her 87 years. "Your uncle knew that. He could have walked away, but he chose to stay and fight, even when it cost him everything." Sarah wiped away tears with the back of her hand. "I'm not sure I'm strong enough to finish what he started." "You're not alone, dear. That's the difference." Margaret gestured toward the window, where Sarah could see people gathering outside. The bakery, some carrying homemade signs of support. "Your uncle fought by himself. You have all of us." This was the transformation Sarah hadn't anticipated. Not just the investigation of North Haven or the validation of her uncle's decades of work, but the awakening of a community that had too long accepted the unacceptable. People who had whispered their concerns in private were now speaking out publicly. Families who had suffered in isolation were finding connection and common cause. With Margaret's help, Sarah reopened the bakery that afternoon. As she kneaded dough with practiced hands, customers streamed in, not just for bread and pastries, but to share stories, offer support, and ask how they could help with the growing movement for accountability and justice. By evening, the Morning Crumb had transformed into an impromptu community organizing center. Rachel arrived with updates on the investigation's progress, reporting that state officials had sealed off a section of North Haven's property where ground-penetrating radar had detected what appeared to be buried waste containers. "They're finding exactly what your uncle documented," she told Sarah as they closed up the bakery. "Decades of systematic dumping, deliberate contamination, falsified reports to regulatory agencies. The evidence is overwhelming." "How is North Haven responding?" Sarah asked, wiping down counters and putting away unsold bread for donation to the local shelter. Rachel's expression darkened. "With everything they've got, their PR team is working overtime, portraying the company as a victim of overzealous regulators and opportunistic accusers. They've filed motions challenging the search warrants and questioning the chain of custody for the samples we collected. Will it work? Some of it might. Corporate environmental cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. But there's something different happening here, Sarah. The community isn't buying North Haven's denials this time. Too many people have seen the evidence, made connections to their own experiences, started asking questions they've suppressed for years. This grassroots awakening proved to be North Haven's most significant challenge. When the company announced a town hall meeting to address community concerns and correct misconceptions, and they clearly expected to control the narrative with reassuring corporate messages and scientific-sounding dismissals of the evidence. Instead, they faced a community transformed, informed, angry, and unwilling to accept platitudes or deflections. Residents arrived with detailed questions about specific dumping sites, armed with maps from Henry Mitchell's archives showing contamination patterns that perfectly matched current testing results. Former North Haven employees, emboldened by the changing atmosphere, stood up to describe unsafe practices they had witnessed or been ordered to participate in. Victor North Haven, accustomed to deference and artificial displays of community support, found himself confronting authentic outrage from people whose trust had been violated for generations. When he attempted to dismiss Henry Mitchell as a disturbed individual with personal grievances, the crowd erupted in protest. Sarah, sitting quietly in the back of the high school auditorium, watched as the power dynamics of Willowbrook Valley shifted before her eyes. The company that had dominated every aspect of community life for decades suddenly appeared vulnerable, its carefully constructed facade of corporate responsibility crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. The turning point came unexpectedly from Daniel North Haven. As his father struggled to regain control of the increasingly hostile meeting, the younger North Haven abruptly approached the microphone. "I want to address something directly," he said, his voice strained but determined. "I've recently become aware of historical practices at North Haven Industries that do not align with the values I believed this company stood for. While I cannot speak to decisions made before my time in leadership, I can say that I am committed to a full and transparent investigation of these allegations." Victor's face registered shock and betrayal as his son continued. "If North Haven Industries has failed this community in any way, we have a moral obligation to make it right. That begins with honesty, however difficult, and accountability, however costly." The auditorium fell silent, the audience processing this unexpected fracture in the North Haven facade. Victor attempted to reclaim the microphone, but Daniel stood firm. "We will cooperate fully with state investigators," he concluded, looking directly at his father. "Every document, every site, every decision will be open to scrutiny. The people of Willowbrook Valley deserve nothing less." The rift within North Haven leadership accelerated the company's unraveling. By morning, reports emerged that Daniel had been removed from his executive position but had taken copies of internal documents to state investigators before his dismissal. The company's stock plummeted as investors recognized the severity of the potential liabilities. 2 weeks after Sarah had first discovered the hidden room beneath her uncle's barn, Prosecutor Marsh announced formal criminal charges against North Haven Industries and 3 of its senior executives, including Victor North Haven. The charges included environmental crimes, public endangerment, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and in the most serious development, involuntary manslaughter related to deaths linked to contamination. "This is just the beginning," Marsh told. Reporters, as we continue analyzing the evidence and interviewing witnesses, additional charges may follow. Our priority remains protecting public health and ensuring that those responsible for these crimes face appropriate consequences. The day the charges were announced, Sarah received permission to bring Emma and Caleb home from protective custody. As they drove through Willowbrook Valley, she pointed out crews testing soil and water at various locations, explaining in age-appropriate terms what was happening and why it mattered. "Are the bad people going to jail?" Caleb asked from the back seat, his 7-year-old mind still framing complex issues in straightforward terms. "Some of them might," Sarah answered honestly. "But what's more important is that they can't hurt anyone else now. The secret is out, and the whole community is working together to make things safe again." Emma, more reflective at 10, had a different question. Did Uncle Henry know this would happen someday? Is that why he kept all that stuff in the secret room? Sarah considered this thoughtfully. "I think he hoped someone would find the truth eventually. He didn't give up, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That's a kind of courage I never really understood until now." Then, as they approached Riverstone Farm, Sarah made an impulsive decision, turning down the long driveway rather than continuing to their home in town. "Where are we going?" Emma asked. "There's something I want to show you," Sarah replied. The key farmhouse stood as she had left it, weathered and neglected, yet somehow more dignified now that its secrets had been revealed. Sarah led the children inside, past the dust-covered furniture, and up the creaking stairs to a small bedroom she hadn't entered during her first visit. Her uncle's childhood bedroom remained largely unchanged from decades earlier. Faded posters of space missions decorated the walls, and bookshelves overflowed with volumes on science, nature, and environmental studies, the early interests that had shaped his life's mission. "This was Uncle Henry's room when he was not much older than you," Sarah told her children. "I never really knew him, but I've learned so much about him these past weeks. He was brave and stubborn and refused to look away when he saw something wrong." Emma ran her fingers along the spines of the books. "Like you, Mom." The simple comparison touched Sarah deeply. "I'm trying to be," she acknowledged. "Sometimes doing the right thing is really hard and scary, but that doesn't make it any less important." They spent an hour exploring the house together, Sarah sharing the pieces of family history she had discovered in the hidden room, photos of her mother as a young woman, letters between her grandparents, records of happier times before Northaven's poisons had stolen so much from them. As they prepared to leave, Sarah paused in the living room, looking at the spot where she had first discovered the loose floorboard and the key that had changed everything. "What are we going to do with the farm now?" Emma asked. It was a question Sarah had been considering since the investigation began. The property held painful memories, but also represented her family's resilience and commitment to truth. "I'm thinking we might turn it into something new," she said. "Maybe a center where people can learn about environmental protection, or a place for scientists to study how to clean up contamination. Uncle Henry would have liked that, using the farm to help heal the damage Northaven caused." 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, much like the one when she had first arrived at Riverstone Farm, Sarah stood on the porch watching as workers installed a sign at the property entrance: "Mitchell Environmental Education Center, healing our land, protecting our future." The transformation of the farm mirrored the broader changes in Willowbrook Valley. Northaven Industries had entered bankruptcy, its assets frozen pending the outcome of criminal proceedings and multiple civil lawsuits. Victor Northaven awaited trial under house arrest, his empire crumbling as former associates testified against him in exchange for leniency. Daniel Northaven, in a move that shocked the community, had established a victims' compensation fund with his personal fortune, working with state officials to ensure that families affected by contamination received medical monitoring and treatment. His cooperation with prosecutors had been instrumental in building the case against his father and the company's other executives. Most significantly, the environmental remediation of Willowbrook Valley had begun in earnest. Teams of scientists, engineers, and environmental specialists were implementing cutting-edge techniques to detect, contain, and remove decades of toxic contamination. The elementary school property was undergoing complete soil replacement, with plans to rebuild the facility to the highest environmental and safety standards. The morning crumb had evolved as well. Sarah still baked bread each morning, finding continued solace in the rhythm and certainty of the process. But the bakery had also become a community hub where residents gathered to share information, coordinate volunteer efforts, and support each other through the challenging process of reckoning with Northaven's legacy. Dr. Patel had established a free clinic specifically focused on monitoring and treating conditions linked to environmental exposure, funded in part by grants secured through Rachel's connections with national environmental justice organizations. Michael had assembled a legal team providing pro bono representation to families pursuing civil claims against Northaven. And at the center of it all was Sarah Mitchell, a widow who had reluctantly inherited an abandoned farm and discovered not just a hidden room, but her own capacity for courage, leadership, and transformation. "You've done remarkable work here," Prosecutor Marsh commented, joining Sarah on the porch as the Education Center's opening ceremony concluded. Community members milled about the property, exploring the exhibits on environmental science and the memorial garden dedicated to those who had suffered from Northaven's actions. "I just found the key," Sarah demurred. "Everything else happened because people were finally ready to see the truth." "Don't underestimate your role," Marsh countered. "Your uncle spent decades gathering evidence, but it took your courage to bring it into the light. Sometimes the most powerful act is simply refusing to look away when it would be easier not to see." As the sun began to set over Riverstone Farm, casting long shadows across land that was slowly healing from decades of abuse, Sarah watched Emma and Caleb playing with other children near the old barn. The hidden room below had been preserved as a testament to Henry Mitchell's solitary struggle, now transformed into an educational exhibit about citizen science and environmental activism. The inheritance that had once seemed like an unwelcome burden had become a gift beyond measure, not the land itself, but the truth it had contained and the purpose it had revealed. From the depths of that hidden room had emerged not just evidence of corporate crimes, but the foundation for community healing, environmental restoration, and personal transformation. Sarah Mitchell had arrived at Riverstone Farm, a grieving widow seeking only to close a chapter of family history. She had discovered instead a new beginning, for herself, for her children, and for an entire community that would never again allow powerful interests to sacrifice human lives for corporate profit. The hidden room had changed everything, not by containing secrets, but by finally revealing them to those with the courage to see, to speak, and to act. In that revelation lay the most powerful inheritance of all, the knowledge that ordinary people standing together for truth could transform even the deepest darkness into light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.